Morning, Dan. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
I'm on Amazon looking at this Kevin Cruz book, Myth America, that somebody nominated.
Myth America.
Myth America. Yeah, historians take on the biggest legends and lies of our past. Um, vote. It's in the new books suggestions in Obsidian. Voted
Oh,
for by Pat and Chris so far. Um, Apparently, it's a newly published bestseller. Hey, Mark. I'm looking at the book suggestions in Obsidian, and I was also in Amazon looking at Myth America by Kevin Cruz, which I guess is more or less contemporary, right?
Hmm.
It came out, it's a 2022 book. The the introduction definitely talks about COVID and current issues, but then the
Great.
chapters are American exceptionalism, founding myths, vanishing Indians, immigration, America First, the United States is an Empire by Daniel Immerwahr, The Border, American Socialism, Magic of the Marketplace by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, The New Deal by Eric Rauschway, Confederate Monuments, The Southern Strategy, The Good Protest, The White Backlash, The Great Society, Police Violence, Insurrection, Family Values, Feminism, The Reagan Revolution, and Voter Fraud. So it does seem like there would be a lot to talk about that might,
yeah. Kevin Cruz writes a lot on Twitter
yeah.
as a historian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I follow him. Let me check him out on Twitter. Let's see, search Twitter, Kevin. K-R-U-S-E.
Evening, guys. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, Tim?
Hi, Tim. Hi, Mark. How you doing?
Pretty well.
Very
This is
full week.
yeah. The time zone difference now is
Where
a
are you
challenge.
at, Mark?
We're in Kauai,
Wow.
so that's four time zones. It would be five, but they don't do daylight savings time.
Mm.
Hmm.
Now, this has been our pattern since, well, pretty much since I retired. So we avoid two of the worst months in Minnesota. Um, so we go through the holidays with our kids and stuff, and then leave for here.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we are actually having a little spring thaw or
Yeah.
January, February thaw right now. It's going to be 40 degrees. My 16-year-old daughter is going to take the polar plunge in Lake
Oh,
Bemidji today with her friends. And so and then they're going to have an outdoor tent sleepover. They
Oh,
claim
wow.
it's going to be a tent sleepover, but I'm not sure. They might retreat to the house at our friend's place. So yeah, it's
good for them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's good to kind of lean into
Yeah.
the things that the 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 environment
Well,
makes available. Yeah.
I check the productivity of my solar panels almost daily. So
Mm,
I can, I mean, so I can tell when we've had heavy snows because all the panels get covered up and they don't
Oh,
produce for
my.
a while.
uh-huh. Are they
But they've
roof
been,
mounted or are they on the ground?
yeah,
Yeah.
no, they're roof mounted. So and
Yeah.
so I know when there's been a good thaw that you can
Yeah.
really see an uptick then.
Yeah. I was thinking of putting some panels out in the field.
No, really.
That, well, I don't know. I guess maybe you won't be able to see. I thought I might be. I guess it's too much in the sunlight. Well, there's a field anyway on the other
Yeah,
side of I don't know, about 6 acre field there. And I was thinking I would put some out there at some point, but
right.
haven't gotten around to doing it.
But you were doing that kind of thing. No, I mean, we just hired ours done.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. They can tell you what your projected yield is fairly accurately.
Mhm.
Somehow they have satellite, imagery of your home and the orientation of the roof and the side.
Mhm.
So we were projected to be able to cover about half of our electrical costs with 14 panels.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, one of our kids did. I mean, they had some kind of different plan that. See, we paid for our setup. They just kind of they end up paying. I don't quite understand. They have a different kind of model or arrangement, but they can do better than we can. So,
Mm.
but it's just been kind of fun. And I mean, they basically told us that it probably wasn't worth our investment over, I forget how many years they figure that we wouldn't necessarily, come out on the positive side, but it seemed like the thing to do, and
Mhm.
it's been kind of fun just to track the data.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And feel like you're doing something to kind of contribute.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
probably more why we did it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little sad they made it all about the finances. And if
Mhm.
it wasn't for the rebate, you really wouldn't make your money
No,
back. But
no.
it's the right thing to do.
Yeah,
I live in
Right.
Southern California, so we have a wealth of sunlight.
right.
And I have 16 panels. We cover almost all of our daily costs.
No,
Mm.
well,
And so we have the Edison's our provider. That
no,
bill is down to a couple of hundred a year.
Mm.
no.
But
Yeah.
it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in central and southern Minnesota, the power companies are required to basically do grid to attach you to the grid, right, and to do net
Right. Yeah, we're
net
attached to the
metering.
grid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so are we.
Up here, we're not because,
Oh,
ironically, because we are not a corporate power company, we're a co-op,
co-op.
which is kind of a weird, sort of a misnomer, right? We're a co-op, and yet we're part of this Touchstone Energy Group, which is probably the biggest national electrical generation concern going today, right? But it's formed of all of these little regional co-ops, which is a really weird way to run a monopoly.
Yeah.
And oops.
So you get power at night off of your co-op?
Well, I don't have any panels, so
Okay.
yeah. So I actually I do charge my my Tesla off peak, right? So I pay and the thing is, I mean, we pay so little. I pay 14.3 cents per kilowatt hour at peak, and then like 6.7 off peak. So
Wow.
it's about as low as it could possibly be.
Yeah.
Which was another thing that sort of has prevented me so far from going the panel route.
Yeah, I imagine in the Midwest, as far north as you guys are, it would be hard to justify financially.
Well, I think if I had panels, if I had ground mounted panels and I could pivot them a little bit,
Oh yeah.
I think it might really, efficiency wise, it might be worthwhile. It's just that, even if I paid 100% of my of my thing, it wouldn't necessarily, be financially right. Go ahead, Tim.
Hi, I was just going to interrupt on the bit about charging the Tesla.
Yeah,
we have a virtual monopoly here. Each of the shakedoms, i.e., the equivalent of your 50 states, we've got 6. They all have their own monolithic utility to which you buy your district cooling if you're in the right area. You buy your electricity and you buy your potable water, and you can buy your irrigation water separately if you've got a very big need for that.
Yeah. What's
not in the utility is gas. So gas is relatively rare and is often brought in by tanker as a propane delivery.
Mm-hmm.
But some places are on piped gas. And when you follow the pipe back far enough, you find there's a really big propane tank, and they mix. And the thing that sounds initially hugely scary is they mix it with compressed air to make what's known as synthetic natural gas.
Hmm.
There's if you want to burn gas as you normally do on a cooker, there's a characteristic number called the Wobbe number, which is what you're interested in. And they can mimic natural gas by taking propane and mixing it with a bit of compressed air to get the right Wobbe number.
That's what you used to do with like a Coleman stove.
Sorry?
That's what you used to, what campers used to do with like a Coleman stove. You would put a liquid in, and then you would pump it, and it would create this pressurized thing that sort of simulated natural gas.
Yeah, white gas.
Yeah, I mean,
White gas, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Obviously, the UK left coal gas or town gas, partly because it used to kill you. It was a suicide thing.
Yeah.
Went to natural gas with all the oil from the North Sea. Anyway, so we have effectively, in terms of what comes in a pipe and what comes up a cable, is a monopoly. If you go to their office, so for the Sheikhdom of Dubai, it's Dubai Electric and Water Authority. So if you go to DEWA to pay your bill in person, as of about 8 years ago, there were special parking spaces for you to park your electric car at and charge up for free while you were in the queue for paying your electric bill and your water bill and your cooling bill if you had one. And I always thought that was a bit strange, because at that point, I don't think there was a single Tesla here. Now, at the moment, the other thing that is quite odd is there's only one shopping mall I can think of that has actually got Tesla charging stations in its car park. So you pay extra for that. But it's probably 2%, 3% of the cars here are Teslas. And and of course, me being partly deaf as well, it doesn't help, because I can't hear them. I really can't hear them when they creep up on you. And it's like, there's no ice with them. It's just not cool.
Yeah. Well, supposedly there are 3 that are listed in. Well, yeah, I guess there are a bunch generally in the UAE, but it's weird because the regular chargers are generally so underpowered that it doesn't even make sense to try to charge your Tesla on them. It's just you get a charge rate of, I did one when I was looking at colleges with my son. We went down to it must have been Northfield, where St. Olaf and Carleton are, and there was a town. The town had a public charger, and it wasn't free, but it was so slow. I was getting, I got like 1 mile per hour of charge, so it didn't make. Really didn't make a lot of sense. So I had to figure out where the next nearest actual Tesla supercharger was, so that I could go and.
Yes, so they're not not a petrol pump equivalent yet.
Yeah, not even close. Yeah, outside of metro areas, but then when you think about their business model, right, they are hitting 90+% of the auto market just by focusing on metro areas. So, so I can't really fault them for that, but I don't think I will get, I mean, I'm sure I'm not going to, when I turn in my Model 3 in March, I'm not getting another Tesla.
And
I
for the other thing that we don't have here yet is the Tesla wall power unit to help smooth out whatever solar we pick up as electric through that system. But there are people that have effectively built their own with a pile of lead acid batteries and some switching. And of course, all of the data center type places, hospitals, big hotels, all the shopping malls have got something on UPS come generator power, simply because you have to.
Right.
You can't suddenly have power failure and oh dear, you're stuck in a lift.
Yes, exactly. Right. And actually I worked for a tech company that they were so concerned about their data center, probably more than they should have been. But they were concerned enough about it that they bought a natural gas generator that would, come on in a couple of seconds and all of that. And so take over from the batteries. It'll be interesting to see what happens with with storage, because that's obviously going to be important for kind of making this transition to
oddly enough, in the 5 years of operation here that I was on a particular project, we had one power drop on one of our connections, and we had 51 electric connections to outside, simply because they limit the size. You don't run your own HV. You take it at 400 volts, and that's it. They only charge out 400 volts.
Right.
And so we had 51 connections, partly geometry, partly capacity. We had one of those 51 go down once in 5 years, which was half as many times as I had in a 4-year operation of a data center in Geneva, in Switzerland, which was just up the road from CERN, so had all the power connections and all the internet connections it wanted. And so Dubai in that context was, on that score, twice as good as Geneva was. The only real difference was the Geneva power guys were there in 6 minutes. We didn't even have to phone them. But it took 4 hours for the right guy with the right piece, with the right key, to come out here. The wrong guy kept on turning up. They wouldn't give me a key. I said, look, it's me. I've got 51 of these rooms, and I've got an oxyacetylene torch too. What would you rather I do? Because at the moment, you've now closed the biggest water park in the world.
Yeah. Well, say we had Chris there for a minute, but he dropped. So maybe we'll get him back. And Nate has arrived. Morning, Nate.
Morning, howdy.
We've lost Chris.
We lost him. Yeah, there were 2 of them, so maybe he was having some audio problems, and then he dropped to 1, and then he dropped.
I didn't see 2 of them. One of them's bad now.
I've also heard that they are going to recycle Tesla the car battery packs into Powerwalls. I don't know how that is going to change when they begin using these new 4680 batteries and building structural packs rather than kind of the skateboards that they did in the first, in the S and the X and the first generation of the 3s. So yeah, but there've got to be millions of 3s, like mine, that'll be coming off lease. And mine, actually, the front motor is getting kind of loud. There's no maintenance that you ever do on them. So
it'll be an interesting project to start
Yeah.
Stacking the bottom layer of a few cars up on top of each other.
Yeah. Well, and actually once you get, I mean, I think I've got like a 75 kilowatt battery pack in the Model 3, it's a long range all-wheel, and so so that is bigger than a Powerwall, right? So so if we could change some regulations, looks like Chris is returning. Hey, Chris.
Yeah, and
Zoom will like me today.
it's almost getting to the point where you really should be, rather like they do in India with these microgrids, where everybody's got a small solar panel, but most people don't have enough for their individual peaks.
Right.
But when you look at all the different families in the village, the total peak is less than all the accumulative peaks.
Right.
Simply because of it, it's out of step. There's a few people that work late, there's a few people that work early, there's people with kids, people with no kids, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
And you get down to the sort of a district, community, village level, and 20 houses and 10 power walls or
right.
10 cars or 10 refurb cars, stick them on a wall. You'd be able to do quite a lot with that.
Yeah, I think I mean, and that's always been sort of the flaw of the power grid, right? Is that it's real time, right? There has been no storage. I mean, there have been a couple of kind of interesting storage processes, like pumping water up to the other side of a dam and then letting it run down during peak times and things like that. But there hasn't been a battery solution in the way that there is with these these utility sized scaled batteries.
Yeah, I mean, I like the newer ish turbines in sea valleys. So there's a tidal turbine that is on a barrage in France, and there's another one in Korea that does very well. Right. They're barrages, but the newer ones are freely suspended and are bi-directional.
Right. Right. Well, and you've got to imagine that there are places. I mean, think of like the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, right, where the tidal bore is incredible. Yeah. Right. We should be harnessing that.
And if we slow the moon down a little bit, so what? Type thing. It's going to be eons before we need to worry about that one slowing.
Yeah, as far as the externalities go, yeah.
And of course, UK is surrounded by quite a lot of tidal water, and places like Bristol and Cardiff have a very high range of tides too.
Right. So and they're going to be thinking about seawalls, one would imagine, in the next generation or two.
And if we're going to put a seawall up, let's put 2 up and put some holes in the outer one,
right,
and let it drain back out. When the tide goes back out. So there's lots of things that could be done.
Yeah. Yeah. So we sort of wandered into this conversation from one initially where we were talking about next books. So maybe we should kind of wander back to that a little bit, because this is. Go ahead, Chris.
I don't know if you can hear me at all. I'm having so many Zoom problems this morning, but I presume we were talking about Pirate Musk. Was that what I missed? Okay, all right. Back to books then.
Yeah. Yeah, we were. I was. We were talking a little bit about Tesla and actually, Tim, you had put in the chat that Curtis McHale has gotten back on YouTube, and I noticed that what's his name? The other guy that we talked about last week is back, and I got an email from him saying I'm back, and I'm and I mean it wasn't personally to me, it was to his mailing list. He's going to start blogging again, and what the heck is his name? He's the guy who is talks a lot about his ADHD.
Oh, right.
Yes, Brian Jenks. Yep.
Jenks.
Yep. So it does seem like there's we had kind of talked off and on about, sort of maybe ping-ponging back and forth from kind of a PKM related book to a other more, and the thing that seems to have energy behind it right now is this Myth America, but it is and I guess maybe we could say that this was that this doesn't count to some extent, right? Because it's going to go by so quickly, and it's not really about although maybe part 3 will be about a little bit more, because he'll talk about the implications of what he's found and all of that. Yeah, I'm looking at the book suggestions in Obsidian, and the index book would be that would be history of PKM, right? And that looks like it had a little bit of support. Donut economics was another one. I haven't weighed in. I haven't voted for that. I guess if I did, then it would have 4 votes, and we might bring Lewis back into the regular attendance.
Well, is there a consensus about which direction we should go? And if this one doesn't count really, we've been kind of alternating between a history or economics-y kind of thing and a note-taking-y kind of thing.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is, if are we going to count this? Because if it does, we can do whatever we want, really, if we don't count this. John, what are you thinking?
Well, I wanted to go back to the YouTube references. We got referred to by Forrest Perry. I don't know if you saw that. Mm-mm. And he was quoting Chris, some comments that Chris made, and I thought it was kind of funny about peeing out a book.
Oh,
and totally out of context too, right?
No, it was in context. No.
Do you have a link to that? I'd like to take a look at that.
I can find it.
Cool, thank you. It's kind of funny as I was kind of listening to this again, and looking at it, and and trying to think about what I want to say about the second section. I was also confronted with a bunch of highlights from Utopia of Rules, the Graeber book with the pink front that looks like a memo. Which is really as I was sort of as Readwise was pushing these into my face, and I was reviewing them yesterday and today, I was thinking, that was probably that might have been a better choice for the type of conversations that we have than this has been so far. Because while I'm sort of appreciating what he's doing with this, so far with the history, I'm sort of waiting for the shoe to drop, and and for there to be something generalizable from that. So I guess it's interesting, from a PKM perspective, it is interesting, because it sort of engages that question of the specific and the general, and I guess I've been thinking about that and working with that in the context of actually ChatGPT as well. I had been sort of not looking at it for since it came out, and then this Wednesday I had to chair a meeting of a virtual Zoom meeting of our systems, the Minnesota State Systems Technology Council, for academic and student affairs. And so, and we usually have sort of a lunchtime thing that we do. So it's like a 4-hour meeting. We have a morning meeting, then we eat lunch, and then we have a kind of a lunchtime discussion. And then, and then it continues for another couple hours in the afternoon. But the lunchtime discussion this time around was ChatGPT. And there was a guy from the system office who is a huge enthusiast. and so we thought, I initially thought we'd be talking about, the challenges of Chat GPT and, how students are going to use it and how we're going to sort of try to, to think about, what students are doing. This guy was very positive about it, and that kind of got me looking at it. And so I started chatting with the AI, and, and my impression was sort of that I would ask it things and it would give me sort of the equivalent of a B to C essay. If I were to, if the questions that I asked would have been, essay questions on an exam or something, so very general, kind of structured very nicely, because the thing knows how to structure an essay, but not really pulling, obviously not insightful, but also not even really kind of finding the most interesting and relevant data that's available out there. And so one of the things that, and so I did ask it some things that I thought, that our understanding has changed about these things recently, and I was wondering whether it would have found that, whether but then now I'm hearing that this is actually a 2020 data set that it was really trained on. So who knows, maybe the next one, maybe the next iteration, that comes closer to the present will be more, will have more valuable knowledge to say. It did strike me as something that would be an interesting alternative to traditional search. Right, because you don't have to, because it'll organize it for you, right? So, and because search is already sort of suspect, right? So I thought, because I had heard, okay, so much of the data that it scraped came out of Reddit, right? That it's going to have, kind of a white male, 4chan-y type of a bias. Which is not entirely inaccurate, I think. I asked it, what were the, like what are the 25 most important inventions in American history, and it gave me a list that was, that, well, did not include birth control. And I asked it, well, what about, the way I asked the question was, things that have changed, American society and culture. So conceivably one where you might answer with some things that affected women, and so you can continue to have the conversation with it. So I asked it, why not birth control? And it said, and it gave me a very politician-y answer. Well, it could certainly be argued that birth control is an important yada yada, but then it just, and then it kind of went on with what it was saying. So what's going on here in the chat? Let me see.
I put the link into FP.
I posted something ridiculous. Me and my buddy, because as English professors, we've been thinking a lot what's happening with ChatGPT? And it's mainly consisted of us just playing around and giving it ridiculous prompts. And so my buddy has been having it write scripts for us, which has been kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, I'll drop this link in the chat if I can get it to work. It turns out that OpenAI was actually paying humans in Kenya to filter out a lot of the stuff from Reddit and from really sketchy sources that it ended up scraping. Yeah, it's pretty, I don't know. There's a lot of things going on.
Holy crap, that's incredible, because I had heard, I had, one of the reasons I didn't really show more interest in it right initially was because, I had sort of heard Jaron Lanier say, and preface his comments by saying, and I am the chief engineer at Microsoft, so I would know a little bit about this. And then he goes on to say that this is just once again sort of a huge instance of undisclosed and uncredited human work that's being presented as artificial intelligence. And so, Nate, what you're saying is, I mean, that would be an even bigger and more egregious hidden use of humans to spoof us into thinking that computers are intelligent.
Yeah, I've been playing with several different AI, I don't know what you call it, engines. And one application that I thought would be kind of interesting would be to select journal articles I might want to read. So it's, you can use Research Rabbit or, Google Scholar to generate a starting set. And it's interesting because, we've been talking about some of this work here. So you have areas in which they're completely opposite, or at least contradictory conclusions, which is fairly common with human research.
Sure.
So I thought, okay, so to me, having spent a career analyzing the nuances of such things when there are inconsistencies, to me, it always is, it's somewhere in the method section. If you assume the data and the analyses are what they are, math and whatever the data are, then if you're finding inconsistencies, they should be in the methodology. So I thought, well, this would be kind of interesting if you could query specific articles and ask for questions about the methodology as a precursor, perhaps, to even reading them. So I started messing around with some of my own publications. Since I would know what's there, right? I know what methods were there, and I know what subject populations were used, and whatever.
Right.
And with Chat GPT, I couldn't get the kind of answers I wanted, and and so I kind of came to the conclusion, I don't know if this is accurate or not, that with journal kind of data, it's not accessing, it doesn't have really access to the full data. It doesn't have access to the full articles. I'm pretty much certain, because it basically would rely. Go ahead.
You can copy paste articles into Chat
You
GPT
can, right.
and have it. Yeah.
Right. So that's, but then, okay, so then that's exactly right. So it's not that it couldn't, you can feed it stuff, but it doesn't necessarily have access to stuff. Now, some other, was it what's an Excite, Insight, something like Insight? I don't know. I was playing with another one yesterday, doing exactly the same thing, feeding it exactly the title of the same article that I had written, and I was able to get more out of it. So part of the difference that may be emerging has to do with the content on which it's trained.
Right.
And
actually, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, that came up sort of when this enthusiast from our system office was, it was Stephen Kelly, in case you're curious, and I thought, well, wait a minute, Mike at Research Rabbit has access to all of this. So, so how is it, that we're, working with something with a much more limited model, and maybe it has to do with the goals and the market that they're trying to address with this product. But
one I saw, it was a couple of years back, and I put a link to it, but Robin Sloan had used a setup, and I'm sure it took him a little bit of programming and some knowledge to put it together, but he was able to go to the Internet Archive and choose specific corpuses of work he was interested in as seeds for the work he wanted to do. But he built a machine essentially so that he could write the beginning of a sentence, and then it would query his database to finish the second part of the sentence, to kind of create a generative space, mostly for creativity. But what I liked about that is that he could generate it based on a set of works he thought was interesting. So if you were a historian, you could say, look at this corpus of books from the 1700s, let's say, and
Right.
generate something out of that, or give me something interesting.
Mhm.
And for me, that would be more interesting than just here's a mound of crap from the internet that you have no idea
Right.
what may come out of it, other than that we're filtering for maybe some of the worst salacious nonsense.
Right.
But to me, that would be interesting. So it's like another interesting example. I read an article a few years ago about John McPhee's draft number 4. And so he had written this essay about the craft of writing. And he's essentially, the gist was, in my 4th draft, I go through and I put a box around like the least interesting words or sections that need something fun.
Mhm.
And then I go to my dictionary and I look up some of those words to find some better language. But the hidden context was he was using Webster's like 1913 dictionary as his source.
Mhm.
And because he had gone back to such an old dictionary, it wasn't watered down and sanitized and just provided every option of every knucklehead word on the planet.
Mhm.
But it had not only interesting words, but had sentences where those words had been used as examples in the past. And it was really from the example sentences that he was getting all these great, juicy, poetic like phrases that
cool.
Webster or some dictionary collector had like found some really great sentences. And it was from those sentences that he was really drawing some like great marrow. So to me, that's, if you're going to use Chat GPT, use it for those fun, creative things, but it's how do you query it to get the things that kind of push the envelope on the edge of that creativity piece. And how do you get that?
Mm-hmm. My wife just bought me. We have a new bookstore in town, so she wanted to actually buy books there, and give them a little bit of business. So she ordered it for me and bought it. She bought me a Shakespearean insult generator that actually uses, and it's cut the page. The pages are in threes, and they're so it's adjective, noun, and it's just a series of, right, you can turn them independently, right, so you can do different combinations of them, but it is the funniest thing. And it actually had it actually had words in it. In the primary sources that I'm processing for my US history students, I came up, I found, one of the, as I'm translating them in some cases, especially the older ones from like the 16th and 17th centuries, I came up with incautelous was a word. And I was like, what is that? And I looked, and I went online. I went to the first couple of online dictionaries that, my regular go-to places, did not find it. I think finally I got to the OED and I found it and stuff, but it was like, it was in there. It was in the Shakespeare insult generator, cautelous. So I thought, well, okay, this is kind of useful. Yeah, it's a funny thing. You can mix and match more than 150,000 insults, it says, in the Bard's own words. So it's just a cute little thing. But one of the things that kind of did strike me about this, I will look at Elicit. It does look like it might give me, I mean, if I were able to put stuff in and say, okay, on the basis of this, do something, that might be kind of fun. So yeah, it did.
I played around with Elicit a little bit,
yeah,
and mostly because Maggie Appleton joined them like sometime in the last 6 months.
Joined Elicit,
and that by itself is an endorsement enough. You broke up.
Yeah, Maggie joined Illicit.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
I think she's working for them now as
Great.
in
Okay.
house.
I like her. Yeah.
But she's got some good work.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of struck me about this whole thing was, obviously, I've already, with the change, that came out of COVID and being remote and hybrid and all of that, thinking about, okay, what am I going to, how am I going to change my learning objectives and, and especially my assessments, right? I'm not going to be able to sort of just stick with the defaults. And now even more so, right? Now, now it's becoming more, much more apparent that, that I have to, sort of lean into that experience. And even, maybe to some extent, the performance of knowledge, right? That, that I want people not only to be able to, sort of write a critical, a critical reaction to something, or to some set of things, or or combination of different things, and do something that is a synthesis, but then also to be able to present it in a way that communicates it effectively, whether that's in writing or I've also started using Flipgrid, which now I guess since Microsoft bought it, they call it Flip. And some other things that give students the opportunity to just talk. I'm using that, of course, in my online asynchronous course. But I think there's that coming out of this, in a few years, I'm going to be doing really different things, and part of that's going to be based on this. This idea, and then of course there are also faculty who are saying, well, oh, this is great. I can use ChatGPT to grade essays. It's like, oh no. I mean, it's actually kind of it's sad in a way, because my wife, she says, I saw something about it where this on YouTube, or maybe it was Reddit, because she's a big Redditor. Where she says, this real estate agent is saying, look at this, I had ChatGPT write an advertisement for a house and it sold. It's like, don't you understand you're now out of a job? and she said that. She's like, this is so obvious.
My favorite was I heard a professor say that all the knucklehead emails they got from the administration that required a response, they were throwing the questions into ChatGPT and just returning the spit out answers as make work for the administrators who were trying to make work for them.
Right.
And that's how they were like clearing off all of the knucklehead stuff from their email chains.
So it'll just be an arms race of intelligent assistants.
Yeah.
Funny. Yeah. So so it did strike me that this didn't have a lot of meat in section 2, or at least didn't have. I mean, it had some interesting things. He does, along the way, kind of say, well, women are really the big losers in this society as it's changing. But was there anything else? Just
I didn't quite read it that way. I read it. A couple of themes. One is there obviously is a big emphasis on describing women, but I kind of interpreted it a little differently. One, that women learn to manipulate what they could manipulate in that setting. And also there was a similar kind of relationship, I thought, between the native peoples and the pirates and others who passed through. So they each kind of learned to manipulate each other to some extent based on, and then at some point they'd get tired of that and, I don't know, kill them all or something. But I saw these two parallel things about, group manipulation of the other group and what it was based on. I don't know if that was intended or I made that up, and as I read it, but I thought you could kind of find those two parallel analyses in that chapter.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I did like the part where the pirates are living in these households, right? And they're kind of and that's how they integrate, right? Through the daughters of, the younger daughters, because they don't already have households that they are, are full members or leaders of.
So part two, and the first third of it or so, was a difficult read for me here, with the semi-rebellion of the pirates against the sexual wars of the Muslims that they were.
Yeah.
And it brought home a number of instances of walking a tightrope here, which I thought was quite a good one.
Yeah.
But I also thought later on there was John, what's his name, was writing something later at one point at some of the pirate princes had many wives, not just the notional 4 that you're allowed semi-automatically if you're a Muslim. And
I didn't get the impression that was connected to the Muslim tradition.
It sort of echoes, because we have, partly because obviously China wants to replace the US as the world power type stroke fact. We have a lot of Chinese here. I know we have a lot of Chinese here from the People's Republic, and they work for People's Republic companies and or government agencies and all those things. And of course, they're just coming out of the one-child policy. So if I've got 6 wives, how do I get away with 1 child? And which 5 wives am I going to disappoint, or which 5 wives are going to be happier than Larry, as it were, depending on your point of view? And it sort of struck me as an echo back to some of the stupidities of the US politics over things like Roe v. Wade and whose marriage do I have rights to discuss and voice an opinion about, etc., etc. Particularly when that marriage is probably not going to create a natural birth either.
Right.
And then, of course, while I was reading that this week, what was in the news from India, as in the country that's about to be the biggest, most populous country in the world, a trans couple have stopped their opposite direction treatments so that they can have a natural baby. And it was like, what would the 25 years ago David say about that in terms of the pirates? And it was just that front half or so of section 2 that was all about the power of the oxen, land's not a problem, how they conducted war at a low level. And that they're also, as in, it's a war that sounds very much like those that were reported by Jar Diamond for the New Guinea tribes. And that all seems to have been stolen by Ernest Callenbach for his story Ecotopia, where it's all very peaceful, very green, very hippie. except periodically the guys all get dressed up in loincloths and Stone Age spears and go and have a war across a brook or a pond or something.
Mm-hmm.
All planned entertainment, but releases all the aggression that builds up because they don't have a normal military, they don't have a normal football teams, they don't have the normal consumerism issues of I mean, we partly joke about, American football is so misunderstood, they carry the ball in their hand. Our rugby guys suffer the same sorts of injuries, and it's not spoken about the same way as there was that Denzel Washington film expose or something of the same situation of the teams knew because they had all the records.
Wow, traumatic brain injuries.
Telling the players. There doesn't seem to be quite the same conspiracy in the rugby yet, but it must come. But it all seemed to be a nice join up in some respects of how do you run a society, because that's what we're really talking about, when one thing is put on a pedestal, rightly or wrongly, in this instance, oxen. And we've spoken in passing, I think, once or twice, about things like the tulip mania of the late 1600s, 1700s, when a thing gets put on top for no real intrinsic true value. And then you have to turn around and say, what does? It's land, and at the moment, it seems to be gold. And somebody who's clever. Ultimately, a clever guy should rise to the top, who's clever enough to use violence correctly. Some people like, say, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, etc., believing they were virtually socialist within their situation. They wanted the Romans and the working people to have more say, yet the oligarchs of the other half of the Senate says, no, that's not my tradition. We don't want you as king. We can't have you as dictator. So we'll call you in as being a naughty boy up in school because you've got too much money.
Right. Nate asks an interesting question in the chat, and I assume that's what you were wanting to say, Nate. And I was thinking, based on what you were saying, Tim, that that we do. I had a hard time really seeing women in this because he sort of waves at them and says, "Well, we suppose this." But there isn't a lot of evidence, and so I was curious a little bit also about how much. Although I feel that for a small monograph, large article, small monograph, there isn't really that inappropriate amount. What do you think, Nate, as far as the wishful thinking element goes here?
I don't know. I'm not a historian. I'm not an anthropologist, so whatevs. Yeah, I think Chris's point in the chat about not cherry picking but highlighting. I think it's cherry picking if I'm feeling in a negative mood on that day. My takeaway from this chapter was that he, kind of like we talked about last week, he wants to maybe redress some of the overlooking of women in his previous books. But it's a little weird that there's one or two named women in this chapter, one of whom is a mythological witch. But maybe that's just what's in the record and whatnot. But I thought there were some great lines in regarding women interacting with and just anyways, this one on 68 I think is pretty great. Nowadays, this inclination of women being in charge of money is accompanied by an ethos that men being whimsical and inconstant creatures, are not really capable of handling money at all. Their incomes should really be handed over immediately to their wives, lest it be frittered away on senseless indulgences.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was pretty fun. And then the whole thing with on 69, the next page of, and it seems like this should have gotten like a little more action if women come in as the solution to pirates having all this treasure that they can't dispose of. I don't know. I feel like that
Money
should have
laundering,
gotten
yeah.
a little bit of better treatment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that struck me about this is that it is, and he also, to his credit, mentions women scholars, right? And so, so probably, if we mined the bibliography, we would find some interesting stuff there as well. One of the things that's kind of struck me about this was that it seemed maybe my feeling that he wasn't getting as much grip as he might on the specifics of Madagascar was that this seems like a story that could be told anywhere in the Pacific, right? In about a 300-year time range, right? Because there's a really, when I taught South and Southeast Asia last semester, and I actually pulled a reading for the students out of a women's history textbook that I had used in a previous semester that talked a lot, that was all about, how the women were sort of central when the Muslims get to, what's now Indonesia, and when they get out there, they find this society where markets are run by women. And when the Chinese get there, get to the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, they find these societies where they have these temporary marriages with women who then sort of become their partners and business managers, right? And they don't turn their money over because they're incompetent or inconstant or anything, but because these women are so expert. And are so well connected. Yeah, and Hawaii as well, right? So, where actually there are named women that you could talk about, but that's beyond his, the scope of what he's doing here. But yeah, I think that this is a big, phenomenon that somebody could really do something with in the Pacific world, before, during, and maybe even after colonization, and that could be a monumental work. What are we talking about?
It kind of reminds me too of, and there's a shift now in society where we talk about the invisible labor and work of women, and there are anthropological studies that indicate in many hunter-gatherer societies women brought in 80% of the calories through gathering food, right, and the men went out and did the big beast hunting and brought back the other 20% of proteins, but the societies would have collapsed without,
right, and the dependable day-to-day. Yeah.
But you have, for most of history, and Graeber is one who talks about the great man theory of the top-down rulers, and a lot of the actual history of the bottom-up, which I think is interesting for us looking at things like note-taking tools that kind of invert the top-down thinking versus the bottom-up thinking. So if you're using a Zettelkasten collecting system, you're working with bottom-up, and then you draw ideas out of that. But how is that kind of reflective of history and society when all this work women have done has been generally erased, and we forget about it, and we focus on the lone genius myth of the guy at the top who came up with this brilliant idea who, you know, Jeff Bezos's brilliant idea goes nowhere if not for the work of, you know, roads and the ability to have interstate commerce.
Right.
Like it just doesn't exist. Yet he gets all the credit for this brilliant genius. And who cares about the workers who are making minimum wage that actually make the day to day happen? But we're also living in a place now where you have things like Twitter and social media, and some anthropologist is going to come around 100 years from now and be able to mine. In some sense, I see some scholars already mining daily diaries that women have left behind over the last several hundred years as indicators of some of this hidden work. But if you have the documentary evidence, it's much easier to prove those points. And, you know, what the trouble I think with this is there's probably not a lot of evidence left behind of the influence those women had at that time in those societies, because they weren't leaving physical traces behind. So you're left with, you know, mythology, or not mythology, I guess, but maybe legend really is probably the better word for it.
I don't know if this is actually going to happen, but my hypothesis is that like Graeber is setting this up so that in the remainder of the book, and he can point at what's going on currently or whenever it was that he did his research and say, so these social relations that they have right now are an outgrowth of all the stuff that happened previously. At least I hope that's what happens.
Yeah, I really like that. You know, you pointed out 68 to us on 69, that passage that begins, the quoted passage that begins at the bottom that says, you know, the Malagasy woman, they say, is a sincere friend who is no less devoted to your interests than to her own. She does not act except with you and for you. And between you and the Malagasy, she is a firm and solid tie, which only death or your disdain can break. Right. So that is, I think that could be said. That was the thing that sort of jumped out at me. And I was like, okay, that's beautifully specific to the Malagasy, but also kind of generalizes across this whole Pacific world, I think, and, you know, and sort of becomes this really, you know, and that's, you know, Chris, to what you're saying, maybe that's the way that we, you know, that we find the women, right, is in these, you know, like the temporary marriage contracts of, you know, of Southeast Asia. And, you know, and these, you know, and these things that, you know, and, you know, and maybe letters, you know, between, you know, Chinese merchants or Indian merchants or, you know, or even Europeans and their temporary, you know, contracted native wives, right, who are running their, you know, their businesses for them.
It reminds me a little bit of, and I can't put together a bigger thesis based on it, but the Cairo Geniza had centuries of written documentation that was saved essentially in a big trash heap, and scholars have been trolling through it. And our friend and fellow massive Zettelkasten keeper, Goitin, was one of the first to like plow through big chunks of it. But there are a lot of marriage contracts that give you ideas of what, you know, 12th, 13th century, you know, Jews in large Arab areas were kind of dealing with and what society and culture looked like, or notes from women to their sons about what they were doing or not doing. In fact, I saw one a couple weeks ago that literally was, it could have been the kind of modern day Jewish mother trope of, you know, you never write, you never call kind of story. But here it was, like in a written letter from the 13th century from an actual Jewish mother to her Jewish son. Like, you know, you never write, like, what's going on? But those types of things, like, then make it much more visible what's happening or what's going on to be able to make those types of bits and pieces. I mean, if we look at, roughly this same time period in New England, we can all name books and stories about whalers and whaling ships and men going off to sea and dying at storm chasing the great white whale. And you don't hear nearly as much about the stories of the women who stayed behind, who were the ones who essentially told or had those stories and kept them alive locally, so that, yeah, my man went off and he never came back. That's a common trope, but it only exists because the people who were left behind told those stories locally and kept them, and but it's really, the cisgender white guy who wrote Moby Dick who gets all the credit for all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, since we're on fiction, and Tim has mentioned Clavel again in the chat. One of the things that strikes me, and I've already admitted that Neil Stephenson was way too influential on my career trajectory, as he probably should have been. But one of the things that kind of struck me about his Baroque trilogy is you've also got this, these networks, right, that you don't, that he just sort of hints at and you don't see, right? He does do a little bit of this kind of crypto Jewish network in sort of northern New Spain into what's the southwestern United States. And then, but then the big one that he does actually describe a little bit is the Armenian International Mercantile network, right? Of people with family connections, across really the entire known world, and those. And I guess the thing that strikes me about that is that those are very, they're a great mystery on the one hand, and also they suggest that that the things that are holding, like what we're talking about here with the women, right? The things that are sort of holding these networks together are not, the types of things that happen in the boardrooms of the East India Company, right? Not those types of conversations, right? But these, kind of networks of family loyalties and commitments on a much more sort of personal and human level that everybody kind of participates in. And it's interesting. It just fascinates me to sort of think about, this whole period of history, because we're dealing with with kind of the 1690s, but that whole period of the age of exploration, from Zheng He all the way to, to the 19th century and the whalers and all that. Yeah. That there's a networked world. One of the things that strikes me as, that I would like, I haven't in all these years since I've been doing history, gone back and reread, Melville, but the places that they go in, in kind of the Latin America, in Chile, basically, dropping by Valparaiso and and the kind of just the world that is set in, that is, I guess to some extent, common knowledge to the people who are, whalers or merchants, right? This whole sort of geography of travel around the bottom of America and, through the Straits of Magellan and then back up, to, Concepcion and Valparaiso and then Coquimbo and then, into, Peru and Ecuador and all of that, is just something that, that must have been just so well just part of the vernacular, and it's just disappeared. So those things, the disappeared things are always very fascinating to me, I guess, is all I'm saying there.
That reminds me too, I've been wanting to ask you, Dan, when you went through your program and did your PhD, did you have a class or a course somewhere that focused on historical method or practice of historiography in kind of this note-taking sense that we all, or at least we here are aware of?
Well, I had there were several potential courses that I could have taken that would have, in the PhD program. There was a dedicated historiography course in my master's program. And then in the PhD program, there were several courses which would sort of check the historiography box. And the one that I chose to take ended up being the environmental history one. And so the historiographical focus is sort of on, sort of understanding the relationship of texts, right, and the change, and the change over time in kind of the thinking of the discipline based on this dialogue of text over time. And so I guess that, and it didn't focus so much on how to note those things and how to understand those things and record them, but it did focus on how to output, analysis of those different perspectives and how they interacted with each other and influenced each other, and how the discipline changed over time. And then you sort of repeat that once you've taken a historiography course, then you sort of repeat that in all three of your teaching fields, right? You build your own. Right. And so that was really probably the big exercise was, now I have to understand, early American cultural history or early American social history, or whatever. And I have to, I have to know everybody who said anything and, and sort of where they slot in and, and what they were, and what they were talking about, and then how the next people reacted to them, and, this whole elaborate conversation. And that's what I was actually using Tinderbox for, was actually I was making these, these tree, diagrams that had, kind of, and actually I did make one that looked like a tree that had, kind of its roots in, early American history told by early American historians, and then kind of branched out and and sort of and branched as people became focused on different elements. At first it's very, it's what you would expect. It's it's sort of political history. It's about the great men and the and the events and the and the revolution and all that, and then it goes on and and then it branches into different sub-disciplines, and and sometimes they interact with each other and sometimes they don't. So yeah, I think that's the thing, and that's the thing that when I'm teaching, and I don't get to teach grad students, unfortunately, because we don't have a grad program where I am, but we do teach majors, we have a historiography course and a historical methods course, and I do try to sort of expose them to that, right? That that their job is to understand kind of how how the field changes, how the discipline split, and then also these conversations that that different scholars have over time. Yeah, that does sound like a Jewish mother joke, Tim says. Yeah, I was thinking that that they might find letters from women to sons, or maybe even to daughters, right, that would sort of in the advice genre, right? That would sort of, maybe match up to, Polonius's speech, and all that kind of pompous wisdom.
What's even the local oral cultural networks hold most societies together, whether you have literacy or not.
Mhm.
And for huge swaths of history, most people had no literacy whatsoever. And even when they did, I mean, it's not common now, but people used to take their commonplace book, and certainly you would die and leave it behind, and people might burn them or destroy them, but your family kept them. In Charles Darwin's case, he had Erasmus Darwin's commonplace book as a thing.
Oh, wow.
But people also quite often would trade, here's mine, read it, use it, mine it, write a few notes in it, maybe give it back to me.
Right.
So there was that kind of like small network thing, which is, seen now in aggregate as social media.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a tradition in that, and I was just looking behind me, and it's not on my shelves here, so it must be at my office on campus. The women's history, it's a 2-volume set that I used. Is there's one set of readings that is about letters that's about this whole, and I think it happened in the Philippines, or in some of the islands that are now the Philippines. There's this whole language, sort of very vernacular, very not a language of kind of education, of formal education at all, but a language that they use to write love notes, and that people would learn this. I guess what had come from an indigenous language and become kind of a pidgin, specifically in order to write these little notes on little pieces of paper, write these little notes to their to their lover or to the person that they're interested in, and deal, in this, and a whole group of people become literate in this, who have no formal education at all, right, and who have no no other reason to do it, but this one thing, it has this one function in their culture to facilitate this courting thing.
It's reminiscent of the idea of leet speak coming out of early texting or pagers, where you could send short notes that meant something.
Yep.
And that harkens back to even older, like late, probably 19th century, early 20th.
Like Cockney backslang. Yeah.
Well, you would send letters in the post, and there was often no presumption of privacy in post. It came later. Or you might get a letter in the mail, and as a teenage daughter, your father would read your letter before you did. So how do you communicate? So, young lovers would create secret communication when they were in person, but then allowed them to send letters back and forth, so that if the stamp was upside down, that's a statement that means I love you.
Yep.
And it's
I used to do that.
Prearranged, or like I'm breaking up, so I've cut the stamp in half and separated it by just a little bit on the corner, so the relationship's over, where it's broken off. But I don't have to state that specifically within the letter. So there are all kinds of quirky little small symbols that appear on letters, and the tough part is you have to know about it as a signaling or a code setup ahead of time. But apparently it was common enough that it had entered the vernacular, at least among the teenagers.
Yeah.
But finding proof of that, evidence of those kind of hidden communications. In fact, I think I want to say somebody just found, or some of a code breaker just cracked a code on some of Queen Mary's correspondences while she was in jail. And we now have like a new set of document breaker finally broke a code she was using. I saw an article in the last 2 days.
I think it was it was like a whole team of code breakers supposedly that like were working together. Yeah.
And probably some massive computing hardware.
And probably some language models, right? But yeah, it's interesting. When I was gonna write a novel or a biography, but I was leaning towards a novel about the Victorian radical secularist Charles Bradlaugh. I was thinking I would set it, because then I became very, very interested in Victorian London, and which is kind of ironic because I've never been above ground in London. I've been, I when I was in college, I was on. I went to England, got a Brit Rail pass, tooled around England for, I don't know, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. But we were never above ground in London. We got, we landed at Gatwick. We took the tube to Victoria Station. We got on a train. We left. Same thing coming back. So I've been underground in London, but not above ground. But yeah, there's Henry Mayhew, actually, in the 1850s, in London Labour and the London Poor, wrote about Cockney backslang, right? Which is like Cockney rhyming slang, except it's full sentences of oftentimes actual English words spoken very rapidly backwards. But then there are some words that are, that they evolve as you say them backwards and stuff. So then I went on, to the Internet Archive and found, whole dictionaries of backslang and stuff. And I was actually going to have a character in the thing that sort of, costermongers were all over London at the time, right? People selling everything. And, so if my, yeah, right, like something like Big Latin too. But also, so if this guy, if this kid that became Charles Bradlaugh is living, up in Bethnal Green, right, and coming down to the city of London because his father is a clerk in a law office down there, and he's a clerk's assistant, and he's running around town, delivering documents and stuff like that. He would as a boy, he would have been rubbing elbows with these people constantly on the streets of London. And I just thought it would be fun to have a back slang speaking Cockney character. But that's still in the drawer. But secret languages, just, yeah, so fascinating.
So I dropped a couple links in the chat that people might be interested in about how mainly youths on the internet are like phrasing things in different ways, specifically to get around content filters and moderation on social media. Some of it, I mean, it's really interesting, but it's also like super weird.
I mean, and I saw something. Who's the weirdo fakey fake congressman now? There was a photo of him, you know who I mean. Santos, yeah. There's a photo of him. There was a photo of him that was circulating a week or so ago of him voting and using, coded physical signs, right, as he's voting, which struck me as weird, kind of. But then, also, is it true or not that everybody who's ever had his portrait painted with his hand in his vest is a Freemason? Or is that just an urban rumor that I've
But the question is, you got to look at the painters and find out if all the painters who painted them were also Freemasons who would have been known to do that.
Right. It was a club thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Or the kind of the the rule of how many legs the great man or general died in battle or didn't. You know, all 4 legs on the ground means,
yeah.
you know, he had a boring death in bed.
Right. Right. And the yeah, and I actually it's funny too because YouTube sort of lets people indulge in these, you know, especially Freemason conspiracy theorizing, you know, and so I was seeing, you know, all these things about the 33.
Or the hidden messages of, you know, the Hays codes in the 30s in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And you get around that, you know, Cary Grant's about to kiss the girl, and then you smash cut to the train going into the tunnel. You know, let's have some coded language here that's maybe not so coded.
Yep. Yeah, there's a great scene in one of my favorite Bogart movies. I think he's Sam Spade in this one, and he goes into the bookstore and it's raining and he's waiting. He's like tailing somebody or surveilling somebody, and he has this little thing with the girl who's the clerk in the bookstore, and. Yeah, and it always struck me that this is probably coming out of a Raymond Chandler novel or something, and so there's probably something quite obvious and explicit in the novel going on, and she takes her glasses off. I says and. Yeah. So
keep those glasses on, Dan.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. So is there anything else that we want to talk about in this short section
or has anybody read through the tail end of it and wants to give us some spoilers because I've only gotten through this section, and I'm hoping for the best for the third installment.
I have glanced at it. It does look like it continues to be a lot of history, and specifically about Ratsamilaho. But then, probably it gets probably where what we're hoping for is all in like the 6 or so pages of the conclusion, or 8 pages of the conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a couple pages into the next section, but not enough to see a shift.
Yeah.
Or the shift I'm hoping for.
Right. Yeah. I think
the promise shift from the the introduction.
I think that I don't know. I've listened to a little bit of it. I haven't read it yet. And my sense is that it's an alternate retelling of, a history that he thinks was told incorrectly or incompletely, but it's a fairly straightforward narrative. And then he does his sort of talking over it in the little conclusion. So maybe we should do both for next time, because the conclusion only adds like 8 pages.
Yeah.
And then back to the previous question of what next. That knowing what we know, which isn't going to be available quite soon enough, does look like it might be really interesting.
Well, I particularly I've read almost everything he's ever written, and I particularly like his ability to tell stories that aren't necessarily linear in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm.
Although that particular book may lend itself to be a little more linear than some of his others.
Yeah. If we should we maybe do something short and then turn to that in, like May?
Just sort of echoing back on Nate's little notes from like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And where we're putting dollar signs in the word of lesbian or something. As I harped to earlier about GP chat supposedly employing tens of thousands to moderate, I got spanked by Facebook today. There is a change in the political jungle that is Downing Street, and there is a new chairman of the Tory party is the one that was there last week. Turns out to have been dodging his taxes again. So the one they've put in place, whose name I forget, suddenly becomes headline material because apparently he's in favour of the death penalty, which we haven't had for practically my lifetime, so 50 plus years. And as much as the British justice system is vaunted as seemingly as supposedly, particularly from the British press point of view, the best one in the world, we have some really huge errors of judgment, and particularly on those that are clearly targets for returning the death penalty to, i.e. terrorism. So there are two very large cases against the Irish over the Troubles. And it was something like the Guildford 4 and the Birmingham 6, or it might have been the other way around with the numbers. All court banter rights, no problem, confessed and everything. And of course, they had both cases were overturned as being cases of excessive police brutality and intelligence services and all the rest of it. And I just happened to quip along the lines of, so hang them all, but save the court costs. And the automatic system just banned me for 24 hours. So
just for a comment. So you didn't actually like post a video or anything.
No, it was just a comment in the thread about this guy who's just become like effectively the person who's going to run the next election from the Tory point of view. And it's got to happen in the next 20 months or something. So picking the date is quite crucial in terms of where is the economy in the bounce or not, et cetera, because of short-term memory loss and all that sort of stuff at election time. And when you get bounced off of Facebook, you get told when the last time and what the last time was. And they keep saying that suggesting violence is against the community standards. Yet there's heaps of violence all over it if you look for it. And I was wondering, given we're talking about ChatGPT, maybe I should get ChatGPT to suggest the one character replacement. And with what? The next time I use the word hanging. And it, oddly enough, in the group of people that were in this chat, a good number of them are photographers. And so they keep getting banned because they keep talking about converting their trannies to digital or chucking away their trannies, etc. And of course, trying to explain to somebody on the other end of a call center stroke. And a lot of these guys are using Facebook as a key marketing funnel to sell their work. So all of a sudden they can't answer orders, etc. And so that keeps coming up as a regular one. Is the system doesn't actually understand plain English, let alone satirical or sarcastic or anything with complexity to it.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes claims about, I mean, language models make claims about their ability to understand context, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of skeptical.
I very rarely use Instagram, and only through a weird fluke actually went there a few weeks ago to get a message saying somehow I've broken some community rules.
Really?
That they didn't specify what it was or that I offended some specific thing. And they said, send us a selfie of a picture of you with this particular numerical code so we can verify you're an actual real person. And we'll see if we will restore your account. So I did. And there's no way that I've been able to figure out how to recover it, but they literally have canceled my main Instagram account that goes back almost since the beginning of Instagram. It's all gone.
Wow.
All the details, all the data, all the photos. There's no way to recover any of it. Fortunately, I backed most of it up, ages ago and have kept copies of all of it. Right. But all the people I'm connected to, I'm now disconnected to. I just have disappeared off the planet. People are like, Chris, did you delete your account? Like, where did you go? How do we find you? And I'm like, well, they just kicked me off. But I also know that there are people who are in the borders of sex work who are just safe enough to be on Instagram. All of them to one have at least 2 accounts. And one account says, if I'm blocked or banned, see this other account. And then they switch back and forth between. So they always have 2 or 3 accounts so that their followers can find and it's usually like borderline fetishism stuff. It's not, because you get kicked off pretty quick for full nudity, but even the middle gray ground is gray enough that if you make a living doing it, because we all know Dan has his OnlyFans account where he's doing the real racy history stuff that he can't put on Vimeo or YouTube.
Right. Yeah, I try to make sure that my collection of leather and whatnot is not ever in frame.
I mean, I notice we're getting this camera angle of the last 2 weeks instead of the long hallway camera angle down at the library card catalog, because that has been getting you kicked off of YouTube.
No, it's because of the sunshine. And I have ordered this was actually, I've got a 6-foot kind of bay window right in front of my desk here. Except it's not 6 feet anymore because we had a guy come in and put sheetrock in. So now it's like 70 1/4 inches, by 46 and change or something like that. So I had to order a custom blind, and it has not arrived yet. Although I ordered it like 8 or 10 days ago. So anytime, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to not have to as the morning progresses, kind of slide my chair this way and slide the camera like that and hide in the corner of my room.
You're trying to hide the cats so we only see the plants.
Yeah, the cats. I think they might have gone upstairs. They were yelling for me to open that door. Yeah, it's actually, we're having a little heat wave here, so. Yeah, so I think we have to, we should all probably kind of wind up now. Tim has just said he's got to go. I guess he went. So I had the chat in front of part of my screen. So yeah, maybe we should kind of conclude. Why don't we decide on a book? I haven't really sort of looked at the table of contents of all the books that are proposed and stuff. That one, the cruise one looked interesting but long. Looked like we would probably have to take that kind of slow, or maybe even just decide which, maybe not every single chapter. I mean, we haven't really gone through a book yet where we've sort of cherry picked and said, well, this one doesn't really.
This is totally off the map, but I am really curious about that author that Chris has referenced 100 times that studies indigenous memory systems and stuff.
Braiding Sweetgrass. Yeah, that might be the one.
No. I would be down to read Braiding Sweetgrass for sure, but I'm talking about
Lynn Kelly.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, yeah.
And I was looking through the book suggestions, and I'm surprised that there aren't any of her books on there. Is that right?
I thought there was a reference. There was one.
A couple of hers are very kind of didactic books about memory techniques themselves, which are kind of dry, and I don't think folks here would. You can get something out of it, but I'm not sure there's a lot of great discussion to be had. Mm-hmm. She has one book that is a Cambridge University Press, and it's a very dense academic. Essentially, it's a reworking of her PhD thesis. And that can tend to be fairly dry. Compared to stuff we've read. I mean, is there
one
going through Anne Blair, you're going to have a whole lot of trouble with that. But
is there one that you think would be a good match?
Probably the best one, or the one I would recommend potentially for us, is this book called Songlines. It's the first in a series of, I think they're now up to 5 or 6 books. And she co-wrote it with another academic who is in kind of the museum curation space. And I think there's enough context with what's in here with her other academic work, and this is written more for a broader public. And it's a good staging point for all the other books in the series that come after it, that talk about indigenous culture and knowledge with respect to areas like astronomy and design and art and other pieces. But I think this book Songlines, we can certainly add it to the list or I'll pull it up and throw that in there, because it is fascinating, and I certainly could even stand to reread it myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mark, were you saying something that I was talking about at the beginning? Was it the Myth America? Yeah, that was Kevin Cruz and Julian Zelizer. Myth America, historians' take on the biggest legends and lies about our past. And that was the one that was like 20 or 24 chapters long. And many of them looked interesting, but maybe not all of them. but we could.
I've read some of Kevin Kelly's other, or not Kevin Kelly,
Cruise.
Cruz's other stuff, and he's got some pretty good kind of broad, accessible history with some reasonable theses behind it. So he's a good writer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind perspectives coming from the other side either, although they might be painful to kind of read through and discuss. I'm thinking of things in the maybe not specifically, but in the tradition of like lies my teacher told me, and and stuff like that, that sort of attack master narratives. Now there's a tradition of attacking master narratives from from the left, and then there's another kind of parallel tradition of attacking them from the right. And so so it might be. I mean, for a while there, once a long time ago, I even tried reading remember when Glenn Beck started writing histories? He kind of got into it before people like Bill O'Reilly and stuff did, and he didn't really write them, but he had a kind of a co-author / ghostwriter that that did most of the work. But he was sort of all about telling a much more patriotic story of especially early America, and I thought as a kind of a punk historian, I would like read those and react to them, and but you can only force yourself to do so much of that.
For diversity's sake, I would recommend we maybe pick a non-cisgender white guy to read for a little bit. I've been trying to not read quite so much of those recently on purpose.
To really mix it up, we could read some non-cisgender white guy fiction if we want to get wild.
We could.
Nonfiction. What's this? What's made up stories? I don't do that.
Okay, so song lines. When you said song lines, I was wondering, is that Australian Dreamtime stuff? And it looks like maybe it is a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's a dramatic. It's not the Bruce Chatwin talks about them, and they're a thing, but they're just describing and talking about what they are and the function they serve, because it's a piece that gets kind of written over in indigenous culture and knowledge bearing, essentially, of we use these structures. So indigenous Australians for 65,000 years have been using these pathways and walkways through the country as memory palaces, essentially, to retain their cultural knowledge, their laws, agriculture, who marries who, their history, all of it is put into these pathways. And it's also mirrored in the sky for astronomy as well. So when they use legends and mythology related to constellations, those same stories are mirrored on the ground. But what happens is when the British show up and take over the country, they put up fences and fence lines, and you can't walk on certain parts of land, which totally destroys all the indigenous knowledge, because you can't now walk those song lines anymore,
right,
to remember the knowledge you're supposed to. So
I feel like
it becomes one of those really damaging things to a culture.
Did this used to be a much larger book and it got split into a bunch of pieces?
No, they literally just published it 2 years ago, I think.
Okay, because this reminds me very much. Even the cover reminds me very much of something that I don't think I have in my library anymore, but that I read like in the late 90s, probably.
There's and that I'm aware of, there's almost nothing on other than her super academic work.
Mm-hmm.
There's thing that's like easily accessible. And the book is one of the first that kind of makes some of what's going on apparent. And they actually create a framework where both she and several other Western scholars and groups of indigenous scholars are now starting to publish what they have termed the third archive. So they're taking Western knowledge and indigenous knowledges and kind of mixing them together to create a written record of this third archive that subsumes both of them so that it's more apparent what's happening, what's going on.
Yeah, the book that I remember was from 1991. It was called Voices of the First Day, Awakening the Aboriginal Dreamtime by Robert Lawler.
The closest I've seen that's kind of popular, Tyson Yunkaporta has a book that's kind of in the same vein. So
there, Mark. Yeah, maybe that.
But from a kind of, it hits on our history, anthropology, and kind of knowledge management all at the same time. So it's, it's definitely up our past alleys.
Mm-hmm. Octavia Butler. I haven't actually. I don't know that I have. I don't think I've read The Parable of the Sower.
I have an appointment to go to the Huntington Library to access her commonplace book archive.
Oh wow!
Oh shit! That's
Cool.
awesome.
I still have to do some heavy prep before I go over because there's like 4 hoops you have to go through with COVID precautions, and if you're not a scholar attached to somewhere visiting on purpose, there's a few other jumps you have to make. But
God, yeah, they
heard
have a big.
A couple months back that they inherited or are keeping her written archive. So
yeah, I think I saw this. I saw that when I went on their website. I was looking. I think they also have a big Thomas Paine collection for some reason. Yeah.
Oh yeah, their early American history collection is like one of the best in the world, apparently. So
yeah.
I was there a number of years ago, and I saw my first Gutenberg Bible, which was pretty cool.
Oh wow!
You've seen more than one?
So far.
Yeah.
The first one in real life.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's one at Indiana University.
What's that, John?
There's one at Indiana University as well in their library. They have amazing collection of lots of things.
Nice.
Cool.
Have you read Parable of the Sower, Chris?
Read which?
Parable of the Sower?
That one I haven't, no.
I think that has to be one of the hoops that you have to jump through.
To get to go to the library.
Oh. It's a good one. I mean, and it's set in kind of like, dystopian LA. It's really interesting.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Oh, and it's a diary. Okay. Cool. All right. So yeah, I like the idea of this songlines. Maybe we should, now that there are so few of us, maybe we should kind of make an announcement of that in the community, on the community page, and see if anyone has any.
Well, I'm happy to let our benevolent dictator, do something.
Me or Tim. All right. Well, then, as benevolent dictator, maybe I will call it because I can't even see. I think it's noon, right?
Yeah, almost.
Yeah. So we should probably go. And I have to go. I have to head downtown and watch my daughter jump in the lake.
But
They've
knowing that it-
they've taken chainsaws and made a big coffin-shaped hole, as I understand it. And a bunch of people are going to do it. You have to pay $50, but it goes to like the women's shelter and the pet shelter and stuff. So this is her. She's going to be 16 in a couple of weeks, and so I guess this is her coming of age thing.
You're not doing the quinceañera?
So I'm gonna go. I gave her my red union suit to wear. So, all right, I will start this processing, and then I'm going to head downtown, and then I should be able to post it this evening or tomorrow morning. All right, take care.
Thanks a lot.
Take care,
See you next
everybody.
For all your work, Dan.
Have a good one.